Hello and a very good morning to you all from sunny Brussels, where I am, but I know everyone is joining us from across the EU for our EU Clusters talk this morning, where we are focusing on raw materials and the circular economy. We're entitling today's session On the Way to Sustainability. Now, of course, it's a very timely seminar that we're having, or discussion that we're having today, because the Critical Raw Materials Act was announced by the European Commission on the 16th of March. So we're going to be talking about that. You're going to hear about that. We're also going to talk about the circular economy, something I believe the Americans call a no-brainer. But in order to get and reap all the benefits of the circular economy, we need to strategize, we need to plan carefully. And of course, as we always say in these clusters talks, we need communication and collaboration. So let's have a quick look at today's agenda. You will, as always, hear the news from the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. We will then, as I mentioned, be hearing a lot more about the Critical Raw Materials Act before moving into our panel debate. And then we will, as always, talk about the funding opportunities. A reminder that if you want to share your thoughts on social media, do use the hashtag EU Clusters Talks. For today's seminar, we do want you to get involved. Now, you can use the chat function, as always, to say hello, share links, and to be having a little bit of discussion in the margins of our main panel debate. But if you do have questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A function. It's down at the bottom of the screen. It's a little voice icon, so please click on that if you want to ask a direct question. We also have the opportunity for you to join in the debate as well. Just raise your hand. There's a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen as well. And we will then allow you to switch on your camera and, of course, your microphone and ask your questions and get involved in the discussion as well. I know it's early in the morning and many of us don't feel like being on camera, but please do take advantage of that opportunity. And do note that the session is being recorded. So if you do that, it will be recorded. But that also means it'll all be available if you miss something to view again later on the website. That's about it from me. We've got the usual setup where we're going to hear a bit about the news and what's been going on in the European Cluster Collaboration Platform. And for that today, I am going to hand over for a change to Marek Pichard, who's the team leader in the cluster policy in DG Grow at the European Commission. Marek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's morning, and I would like to warm you up with the short brief on the event that we had last week in the beautiful town of Koszyce, just at the border with Ukraine, in the framework of clusters mid-regions. As you know, we have this clusters mid-regions across Europe almost every 2 months. This time we did it in Koszyce. And actually very much inspired by our Ukrainian colleagues who applied for having this event in Ukraine, but for obvious reasons we cannot have it in Ukraine. And thanks to our colleagues from Slovakian clusters, but foremost the Slovak Energy and Innovation Agency and the Ministry of Economy, we were able to organize it in Koszyce for Slovak clusters, Danube region, but with a focus on the collaboration with Ukraine. It was the first of this kind EU-Ukraine business partnership event that we organized as DG Grow, the European Commission. I think this is the beginning only. As you know, the Ukraine is now the EU candidate country, and the process of integrating them started. We, as Directorate General for Internal Market, we are responsible for bringing EU and Ukrainian companies together, for integrating them. So this event was very much about this. And I think, as we all are convinced, clusters can play particular role in this, as we are, as clusters in essence are about collaboration. So we had the event. It was exceptional. Set very high standards for other cluster mid-regions. We had 2 prime ministers. Prime Minister from Slovakia, Eduard Heger, and Prime Minister from Ukraine, Mr. Shmyhal, who both addressed the community, cluster community, and Enterprise Europe network as well, highlighting the importance of collaboration. And then when we discussed, we had on site more than 200 people, about 60 from Ukraine. It was hybrid, so we had as well people, more than 100 people online, and then so all together from Ukraine we had 100 people, 200 from the EU, and the setup was as usual. We had the very high level with speeches of the prime ministers. Then we had the debate on the role of clusters in economic ecosystem, interregional collaboration, and then two very practical sessions on doing business in Ukraine and with Ukraine, and then on funding opportunities to include Ukrainian business or Ukrainian clusters in our EU projects. There were pitches, 16 pitches exactly, with proposals of actions to collaboration together. We had as well matchmaking session with around 300 meetings proposals. At the end of the day, we had 160 formal meetings, but registered. But there were much more going on in the meeting. Just I want to highlight two things of what the prime ministers mentioned. The Prime Minister of Slovakia highlighted very much the issue of collaboration. Collaboration is our future, and the future is collaboration. But as well, I want to stress he highlighted the value of EU, which is security. We have some. It's a big value that the EU is creating security, and that's why it's a natural way to integrate the Ukraine into the security area of the EU. And then the highlights from Prime Minister of Ukraine, it's very important, the reconstruction of Ukraine as a huge task for 2021st century. And let me, with this occasion, mention 5 key areas, 5 top priority sectors for cooperation, which he mentioned. So this is energy, hydrogen technology, and the unique gas storage facilities, by the way, largest in the EU, defense industrial complex, agro-industry, natural resources, including rare earth minerals, IT technology. And I would complete it with what we have in the Ukrainian cluster alliances, where the joint research centers of Ukrainian clusters alliance can also work. And we had this in matchmaking, medicine equipment, textiles, engineering, automation. Yeah, so these are the areas I think which were reflected as well in analytics done by input paper prepared for this event, but as well in matchmakings which were organized. So these are the areas where there's definitely common ground of collaboration between EU and Ukrainian companies to integrate Ukrainian companies into EU value chains. So Ukraine is a candidate country, and the best help for Ukraine, this was highlighted many times by speakers, is to do business with Ukraine. So doing business with Ukraine, something that is the best way to help Ukraine. And then last but not least, very important element which I want to stress was the joint statements for collaboration signed between Ukrainian Cluster Alliance and Slovak, Czech, Poland, and Romania and Lithuania cluster associations for collaboration and for integration and for support in capacity building. So this is shortly. I encourage you to look at this web pages in QR. This is on Entrepreneurship and Export Promotion Office, how to do trade with Ukraine, how to export and import, and Ukraine Invest, how to invest and what are the conditions for investments in Ukraine. So of course you will have this slide, so you can download these pages and go more in depth. And of course funding opportunities later. Nina will speak about it at the very end of our sessions. And just as usual, at our cluster collaboration platform webpage, the recordings are there, PowerPoints are there, so you are welcome to see it in more detail. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Getting through quite a lot there this morning, but it's recorded indeed, as you say, so if people missed any of those details or you didn't get a chance to scan the QR codes, you can always go back and look at the recording. Now, yesterday was a very big day for Finland, for anyone who's been watching NATO knows. But we're going to hear a little bit now from a partner from the East and North Finland, the Mind the Gap. We're going to have a quick look at a video here now to tell us a little bit more about that, and we'll give you some more information later on about a regions workshop and matchmaking event that's going to take place later this month. You'll hear about that again at the end. But for now, let's have a look at Mind the Gap.
Hello, my name is Marta Pérez. I'm from the cluster Portugal Mineral Resources. Our cluster is in Portugal, based in Estremoz. We count with a network of more than 80 associates from the mineral resources sector, from SMEs, technology developers, universities, and investigation centers. Our mission is to promote knowledge and sustainable economic value for mineral resources. We are full partners on Mind the Gap project, contributing for the development and management of the open calls, as well for the all transversal activities related with the direct support to SMEs.
Hi everyone, my name is André Carvalho. I'm a project manager at Cluster Portugal Mineral Resources. Mind the Gap brings together SMEs from the raw material and mining value chain, and these SMEs have innovative solutions to make a more digital, greener and circular mining value chain. Mind the Gap provided direct financial support through innovation vouchers to SMEs, and these SMEs built a strategic plan and a proof of concept and demonstration projects along the sector of the raw materials.
One of the projects of Mind the Gap was Query Sense X. It's a 4D query monitoring through multi-sensors assessment. It's a project that intends to apply in real context the powerful web platform called NeoTantec.
The other Mind the Gap funded project is Connecting Stone. Connecting Stone is testing a solution in a real production query environment, which consists of an IoT flexible high-quality image capturing system with immediate management and data availability in a cloud system. Connecting Stone is a system for the digitalisation of raw materials, allowing the access to global market and increasing the possibility of industrial technology absorption, with a critical role on waste minimization towards circular economy goals.
Well, as I say, you can find out more about that at the meeting in Lapland, where I dare say it'll be a little bit chillier than it looked there. We're going to hear now a bit more about the Critical Raw Materials Act. So please switch on your camera. We're delighted to welcome George Morsdorf, who is a policy officer dealing with energy intensive industries and raw materials within DG GROW from the European Commission. George, it's been a very recent announcement, but I'm sure you can tell us a lot about it for those of us who haven't had a chance to read up.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I should share the slides. No, you have it. Great. Happy to present here the European Critical Raw Materials Act that we the proposal for which we published as the European Commission 3 weeks ago. This is a proposal for a regulation which would establish a framework for ensuring a secure and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. And on the next slide, we can see the motivation why we're proposing this. This is twofold. On the one hand, we see a huge increase in demand already in the last years, but even more projected for the next decade or multiple decades. We see, for the example of lithium, how up to 21-fold increase is projected. And this is, of course, needed to realize the green transition in terms of electric mobility, but also grid-scale storage, for example. And at the same time, as we can see on the right side of the slide, that these value chains are often very highly concentrated. In many cases, it's one country, China, but in some other cases, there's other dependencies just as worrying. And of course, these expose us to a too high risk that could threaten our energy transition and the competitiveness of our industry. Then on the next slide, we can see what this Critical Raw Materials Act aims to do. The aim is to ensure security and sustainability of our CRM supply. And it goes along 4 dimensions. So first of all, strengthening our domestic value chains in Europe. Second, diversifying our imports. Third, improving capacity to monitor and mitigate risks. And fourth, to increase, to the extent possible, as much as possible, the circularity and sustainability. Then on the next slide, we have the overarching framework, let's say. So that's important to understand, that we have critical raw materials, which is a concept that we've been publishing a list of already for the last 12 years. So 2011, we had the first list published, which set out which raw materials had a high economic importance and a high supply risk. It's now grown to a list of 34 raw materials, non-energy and non-agricultural raw materials, because those topics are being dealt with in other regulatory frameworks. And this is the overall scope of what we're doing in this proposal. But now with this proposal, we're also introducing a new concept, which is strategic raw materials, which is a subset of those critical raw materials. And which are defined by their strategic importance, so their use in strategic technologies for the green and digital transitions and for defense, and at the same time face a high future supply risk by virtue of having a high forecast demand and at the same time difficulty to expand supply. So those are the ones we really want to focus our efforts on. For those strategic raw materials specifically, we set ourselves benchmarks that we want to achieve by 2030, or we want to at least compare our achievement to. And this is that we achieve a certain level of supply security, namely at the extraction stage, where much depends on geological resources. We're aiming rather conservatively for 10%, that as a minimum that we want to achieve for those strategic raw materials. At the processing stage, we're aiming higher to get 40%. We're already stronger at the processing stage, and we see for some value chains, such as lithium or rare earths, that really the bottleneck is at this stage where China has almost 100% of the global processing facilities, and this we want to change. And for recycling, we also want to aim as high as possible. At the same time, recycling rates today are very low. Because it has to do with the profile of where these technologies are used. Not that much of those technologies, such as wind turbines, are already coming to the end of life. So we have to balance that. And so 15% is a quite ambitious target in that respect. And accompanying those benchmarks, we have a diversification benchmark that we say whatever we source domestically, we also want to ensure that from what we import, not more than 65% comes from a single third country. Next slide, please. Here we see just briefly which raw materials are classified as critical raw materials. So it's, as I said, 34, and then there's a subset of currently 16 strategic raw materials, which are highlighted, which are in bold here. We can go already to the next slide, which is the main measure that we actually present in the critical raw materials regulation proposal, namely strategic projects. So strategic projects are individual projects along the critical raw materials value chain, which really make a difference, which are strategically important to the Union. How do we determine that? That we propose a process with the Commission and the member states, where project promoters can present their projects, and then this board of member states and the Commission would analyze how much does it contribute to security of supply. Is it sustainable according to certain criteria that we set out in annexes? Is it technically feasible, and does it deliver cross-border benefits? At the same time, this applies to intra-EU projects. We also want to have a window for extra-EU projects, so in third countries, and there the same criteria would apply, except that we also say this has to have economic and social benefits for those third countries. So we want to avoid this taking out resources and not having a bigger value chain. So we really want to enter into partnerships with those third countries. And when a project has been selected as a strategic project, it can benefit from certain status aspects. So one is the priority status under certain administrative procedures. Member states would have to offer one-stop shops for those to accelerate permitting. There's certain timelines to be achieved. And then there's also a mechanism to ease access to finance for those projects. So that's on strategic projects. On the next slide, we can see other measures that are in the regulation. So first of all, on risk monitoring and mitigation, we want to, even while substantially reducing the supply risks, we have to prepare ourselves for the case where such supply disruptions occur. And this we want to do by bundling the competencies of the Commission and of member state authorities, which already do have certain supply risk agencies. So there's a lot of expertise to be bundled. And this we want to provide to companies in the form of an open scoreboard, regular stress tests that would highlight where are the biggest dependencies and risks. Companies should also prepare themselves. So we're introducing for certain companies the obligation to perform an audit and report to the board of that company. So this is aimed to provide a certain focus on risk preparedness without actually imposing any measures, but rather putting a focus, and then each company can see for itself what is the best solution for its case, as long as these risks have been assessed. There's something on strategic stockpiling, coordinating that better between member states, and voluntary joint purchasing, but I won't go into detail here. On the next slide, we then see the last big part of the proposal, namely increasing circularity and sustainability as far as possible. This we want to do by, first of all, obliging member states to report and provide an integrated program for national measures on circularity, focused really at the specificities for these critical raw materials, because the challenges often are somewhat different than for other waste streams. We want to create a bigger focus on extractive waste facilities, specifically on closed ones. So there would be a database of closed waste facilities provided with information on critical raw materials potential there, which would ideally encourage the development of remining projects, so revalorizing waste and waste sites. and then specific provisions on permanent magnet recyclability, certification schemes, and the environmental footprint of critical raw materials placed on the EU market. So I'd say this is quite an ambitious set of measures on the sustainability. And finally, then on the last slide, we can see how overall we want to do the governance. So as I said, there would be a board of the European Commission and member states with representatives from the European Parliament as observers, but also the possibility to invite other stakeholders depending on their specific competencies and expertise in an area. And this board would provide really the coordination of all the measures, would advise the Commission on certain legal decisions, and also notably contribute to a better coordination of also external policy efforts such as strategic partnerships, which we want to make sure that they are better coordinated between individual member state activities and the Commission activities for the EU as a whole. Yeah, so this is what we have in terms of measures. On the last slide, we can also see some links for you to look into the proposal more deeply. Looking forward to your questions later.
Thank you very much, George, for that. And of course, as always, we will be sharing those links in the chat. Before I move on to the panel, George, I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions because I see that they're coming in the chat. So let's take the opportunity. Bas Walterhout is asking, to what extent do you estimate that urban mining or recycling and recovery of e-waste can contribute to the future demand of SRMs?
Yeah, so it's certainly something we're very ambitious on. At the same time, as I was alluding to, so we did an impact assessment. We really assessed which amounts of waste coming online, let's say, and what can we then recover. And I think you have to keep in mind that this will take some time. So the idea is we have to set the right incentives and structures now to be able then maybe in 10, 15 years to have really relevant amounts to cover our strategic raw materials needs. So we set this target of 15% for 2030. Of course, later on, we can be much more ambitious. But I think it's that time perspective that you have to see. And for sure, I think we're putting a focus on urban mining, especially on closed waste sites, because there is a lot of unused potential. So start looking into it now, and then really relevant amounts. That's more for then the next decade.
And then Jana Pinka is asking, will there be business development for mining companies? Will the approval procedures be accelerated and organized on a transnational basis?
So there's a lot on permitting in the proposal. It's really very detailed. So it's quite a detailed structure in terms of what timelines should apply at which stage. It's important to keep in mind this is really for strategic projects, not all raw materials projects, but really those that have undergone a certain process to identify their strategic importance. And then, of course, so we have these timelines of 12 months for processing and recycling projects, 24 months for extraction projects, which would be binding upon member states and their authorities. So within that time, an overall decision on the permit for these projects would have to be reached. And then there's other provisions to accompany that on improving the exchange of information, transparency of procedures. So I would say it's quite detailed if you look into the proposal.
Thank you very much, George. I know you're going to stay around with us, so feel free to jump into the conversation later on if you have something to add. But thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to turn now to our panel discussion. So I invite all my panelists to switch on their cameras and microphones. And we have joining us David Fitzsimmons, the Director of Remanufacture Council. Emmanuel Katrakis is the Secretary General of the European Recycling Industries Confederation. Sari Tassa is Senior Specialist at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment in Finland. And last but not least, Wolfgang Reimer is Managing Director of Geocompetence Centre Freiburg and will be telling us a bit about mining and metallurgy region of Saxony. So thank you all very much for joining us today. Let's kick this off, David, with you. What's the current situation? Tell us a bit more about the Remanufacture Council. Give us your opening thoughts to start our debate.
Yes, thanks, Jennifer. So principally, the reason I'm here is that we're bound to talk a lot about more mining, more refining, because we know the demand for these critical raw materials is going to increase so dramatically. But we tend to overlook the important question of what's the life cycle of the products in which these critical raw materials are being used. And the members of the European Remanufacturing Council are typically companies who bring back products to extend the life of the products so that the critical raw materials that are embedded in the product has a longer life before they eventually get smashed up to return the materials back into the recycling loop. So, I very firmly welcome the Critical Raw Materials Act. I firmly welcome the target of 15% recycling by 2030. I think it's very ambitious. I think the target's well above current recycling levels. But there's no measure to take account of the work of those companies that are trying to extend the life of products. And I think that's a mistake. It's an important part of recognizing we need to design products better to extend the life and use of those critical raw materials. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you very much, David. Emmanuel, let me turn to you. Why are you here in a nutshell? Tell us about the work that you're doing.
Sure. So EURIC is the umbrella organization for the recycling industries. We gather national recycling federations from across Europe. They are focusing on the recycling of different streams, including one stream that was already briefly discussed, namely e-waste, by the European Commission and one of the participants. And so for us, we look at the Critical Raw Materials Act as a wake-up call, as the fact that Europe needs to have an ambitious industrial policy, and the fact that especially today, in a world that is far more uncertain from a geopolitical standpoint, it's really important to look at how we de-risk our supply chains. And this is where recycling comes into the picture. As I said already in the past, recycling cannot solve all the problems. We need obviously to make sure that we have more inputs from primary materials, but on the other hand, when products are reaching end of life, we as recyclers can extract more critical raw materials from what is being done today. And for that, we need a few framework conditions, and part of them are being addressed in the Critical Raw Materials Act. First, I think it's important to make sure that we prioritize the product categories where we are going to find critical raw materials. They do not occur everywhere. So urban mining is obviously an important part, but the prioritization work has been done or is being done by the Commission, and that's well. And point number two is to make sure that we have the right measurement, the right, basically, policy instruments. And here, we obviously welcome the target that the Commission has put. We also welcome the emphasis the Commission put on permanent matters and the fact that it foresees, especially recycled content targets, and the kind of blueprints that we saw and that proved to be efficient, and we hope is going to unfold well in the near future, is the kind of life cycle thinking that the European Commission took with the battery regulation, looking at basically a product category that obviously contains a few critical raw materials, and see how from design up until the very end of its life cycle, it can be basically better recovered. And last but not least, I would also mention the fact that, especially when it comes to recycling in CRM, one of the key difficulties to be competitive is to be able to, economically speaking, not only the technology, but the economy, be competitive. And here incentives are absolutely essential, whether we speak about recycled content or market-based incentives, to make sure that the investment that are being made in technologies can be scaled up and become more mature, industrially speaking. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Sari, a very good morning to you. Tell us about the Finnish view on this. What's the current situation? What is your approach?
Thank you, and good morning to everybody in Europe. It's a beautiful morning, I think, now that we are all one. Yeah, we have this national circular economy strategic program ongoing, and there we had a discussion about waste, how to manage them. And we went through the numbers in Finland. So 3 million tons of household waste, 20 million tons of industrial waste, and then 90 million tons of mining waste. Okay, there's something to do and it's heavy, so it's much easier to get numbers moving if we do something there. We made a quick study how the industry sees it, and they figure out that, okay, there's a very positive momentum ongoing with the business. They are looking forward the solutions, and they have had a lot of trials and research, but what they were looking forward was coordination, how to get all these pieces and parts together and make it moving. So this Critical Material Act is kind of answering to our needs at the moment. And also what we are looking forward in our national recycling circular economy project is this economical push and pull effects. That is something that we are missing at the moment. As mentioned already, the markets are global. So also we need to be competitive in this world, but also the operating environment, it needs to be stable or something that companies that make heavy investments can rely on a long term. And of course, Raw Material Act and these strategic programs can be a good push, but we need to make sure that we keep it going from research and these trials to the industrial policy. So that is also what I'm looking forward in my work.
Thank you, Sari. Wolfgang, your organization represents mainly SME stakeholders. So tell us a bit about this from your perspective.
Yeah, good morning to all of you. Yeah, Jennifer, as you mentioned, we are an association with more small and mid-sized enterprises along the entire value chain of raw materials, and mostly representing also the mining and metallurgy region of Saxony. And in this regard, we do very much consider elongated value chains in the regions. And so we are more cared about the implementation of regulations and of acts at regional level, and how they affect the value chains and how these can disturb value chains or how they can boost value chains. And of course, living with the rather small companies provides you also much more insight views about these regulations and how they affect business. So in this regard, we are very sensitive to everything that is going on with what is decided in Brussels and how it is implemented at member level scale. So I think it is important that the clusters here do much more gather the opinions of the stakeholders and can also give support to the European Commission's knowing how the backbone of the European economy reacts on regulations and acts, for instance, like the Critical Raw Materials Acts. Reading the more than 300 pages, we came a little bit to the conclusion that it is not the really big threat. What we observed is that the main response to the known challenges are rather institutional provisions according to the motto "Face a problem, found an expert group." We noticed that there is now centralized permitting at member state level. We talk about a one-stop shop for permitting that requires new stuff to be implemented, and that will also have to raise budget of the member states. To implement this, we will see another critical raw materials board. We were a bit concerned about the permitting legal timeframes. It is set aim extraction 24 months, processing and recycling 12 months, provisions to facilitate and timely deliver environmental assessments and authorizations without weakening environmental and social protection. So the question is, how should this be realized? It assumes that the ball lies with the administration. But finally, it's more about an increasing bureaucratic burden due to EU and member states regulation. and also to increasing people's empowerment that are more and more hindering reindustrialization. In this regard, saying without weakening environmental and social protection gives us the impression that no effective restrictions are imposed here. And the question is also why this support is only given to priority projects. We really need to keep an entire mining value chain alive, and this can't be just realized by only a few priority projects. So it's important that we maintain the mining infrastructure. That this is feasible to cut down also rights. That is exemplarily given also by the federal government of Germany, how they reacted on the gas import shortages. And that we in Germany established to build up an LNG infrastructure within a couple of months. But that has been possible only by cutting down public consultation measures and to speed up the project lifetimes. Then a word to the 2030 benchmarks. Also to us, they look very ambitious. 10% extraction of strategic raw materials, 40% processing of sustainable raw materials, 15% recycling. Seems ambitious. If you notice the real challenges, and that is the high energy price in the EU, and also the volatility of energy, but also now where we have war in Europe, a certain political security given in the European Union. We do also face a huge lack of infrastructure and again, strong resistance from the public. And here I find not a single word how the Critical Raw Material Act will help here. What we faced in the time where the Critical Raw Material Act has been put to paper, it was a disappearance of smelters. We have lost a number of smelters in Europe over the past 2 years. That has not been much posted in the media, but it happened, and it will be very difficult to erect and to reconstruct smelters.
Well,
So,
I think we're going to come on to some of those points in due course. You've covered an awful lot there in one go, so I want to try and break it up a little bit and tackle those one on one.
Just the answer that you wanted to hear from me regarding the Raw Materials Act. We see it.
Thank you. You mentioned actually geopolitical situation. So Emmanuel, let me ask you. Strategic autonomy is a big buzz phrase here in Brussels. So I'm keen to know, how do you think dependencies are being addressed?
Wow, what a question. So today, if we look at there is Eurostat is producing a circular material, I don't know how they call it, index. And what we saw is that more or less 12% only of raw materials being used by the industries in Europe come from recycling. So there is an important untapped potential, that's for sure. On the other hand, the problems, it's not the problems, I mean, the evolution that we are facing today with the war in Ukraine, with the logistic disruption caused by COVID, and with the fact that free and fair trade are no longer the mantra, I would say, from important blocks we saw in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, and the fact that huge volumes of basically subsidies are being pulled into the economy, that forces us also as Europeans to look at what we can respond. And indeed, the CRM Act is, I think, an important step forward. But on the other hand, I'm not entirely certain that it's sufficient. And what Wolfgang has just said, and here I speak a bit beyond basically solely recycling, is that we do have to tackle some structural issues. And one of the structural issues has been the energy crisis and the energy crisis. We as recyclers, we are going to recover from waste, basically raw materials that are going to be used back into basically production facilities, so smelters, refiners, all those kind of companies. And what we saw indeed, that is on one hand, the demand for materials is going to explode as a result of the transition that we are initiating towards green and climate neutral economies, digitalisation. On the other hand, the amount of materials that are needed to basically be in a position to achieve what we want are both huge, and the amount of processing is also extremely important. And if we want basically to have more industries in Europe, we need to tackle those issues. And here, I think, again, the CRM Act is a positive step forward, but might not be sufficient in itself. Point number two, because I wanted to say something a bit more related to recycling here. Again, if we take e-waste or even ELVs, where we have to basically improve is in two different areas. One is collection. We see that when it comes to collection of e-waste or collection of ELVs, we still have, so we call it unknown whereabouts, which is a very polite way to say we don't know where they go. A huge amount of cars that do not go to basically companies that are basically compliant recyclers. And the same happened for e-waste, where we end up with a huge amount, I think it was 5 million tons just of e-waste that are not going to basically the companies that are equipped to do the treatment of those streams. And so this is where we believe that legislation has a role to play to improve collection, but also to improve the basically economics of the activity, because one thing that we have been putting forward quite a lot is the fact that the externalities that recycling bring in terms of environmental externalities are not sufficient into the prices. Basically, when you save CO2 and energy by recycling, that is not factored in the price. And here we also look forward to work with the Commission on making sure, whether it's via recycled content targets and economic incentives, that those activities are going to be better supported to basically pull the demand for materials along the value chain. So I'm going to stop here, but I think that's it's a very important and strategic question indeed.
Thank you, Emmanuel. George, you wanted to respond to, I think, some of Wolfgang's points.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks also, Wolfgang. I think many of those points are very justified and well taken. I think it's important to keep in mind that this one piece of new legislation cannot solve all problems. So of course, there's questions of coherence in terms of regulatory burden. Also point that Commission President noted recently in a Parliament plenary that we overall have to make life easier, especially for SMEs in terms of regulation. So I think there's going to be things coming. And of course, in the relevant stakeholder consultation processes that we always have, things like on the REACH regulation, I think all those concerns have to be brought into the discussion. But at the same time, of course, these processes are complex balancing acts. So I can't comment on what, of course, then will be coming. So that's on consistency. I think also on energy prices. Of course, we're facing this very big challenge, now somewhat alleviated. Still, prices are very elevated, and well recognized that smelters are essential. So I think what we can do with this proposal is really set the targets that then will motivate other action, and especially this focus on strategic project. I think it's really a policy choice or political choice. But let me just say, I think a big part of the reasoning is we face these problems of societal acceptance, of there being, especially on big projects that could make a big difference, some resistance. And therefore, I would say a lot of what we propose is focused on having a process to have like this public buy-in, to have all the member states and the Commission with civil society and Parliament observers to, in a certain sense, vet those projects, such that then they can go ahead more quickly. And then it's, I think, a choice of setting priorities. It's not at all to say that non-strategic critical raw materials projects or generally raw materials projects are less important or should be deprioritized. It's about focusing our administrative capacities in terms of staffing, in terms of internal prioritization within the authorities to those projects, and to have that buy-in in advance, such then the process, which is often cumbersome, where there's a lot of back and forth in the permitting processes, to ease all that. So at least that's the intention, and I hope I think the implementation will be essential, and that all parties work together well in that, and that's why maybe also such governance structures, even though they seem like more bureaucracy, I think it's important to put those different stakeholders in a room to figure this out, focused on those strategic projects without neglecting others.
Thanks, George. I think actually you've answered a question we had that Sean Finlay was asking regarding the proposals and the need to explain CRMs to the wider public. Sean says that there's a deep distrust of the mining sector and resistance to projects, and the Act will fail unless the public and NGOs are engaged. Sorry, let me turn to you and ask, is there a public engagement in Finland? Is that something that you maybe have examples of good practice that perhaps the rest of Europe could draw on?
Well, what I have understood, Finland is one of the largest recycler of steel and so on. We are collecting metals quite well. And it's not the question of these materials, but then the minerals and those not so easy to separate materials, and including some organic materials also. We are looking forward. We are now studying a lot about these recycling possibilities, chemical recycling, and the possibility to take the tailings and then let's say scrap material, how to get them in the same processes, because the point is that you need to have some kind of predictability of materials when they are coming, if they are used in industrial scale, so that we could have constant flow of materials available for European industry. That's one thing. And we are now starting projects regarding digitalisation, because one of the important things is that you need to know your material. That was also in these PowerPoints. Know your stuff, but also from where comes the customers, what the customers should know, and how these two meet each other, and to create this kind of trustworthy marketplace where you are not then telling all your business secrets at the common place, but you can keep some of your secrets. And how to create this marketplace. It's not question of circular economy or raw material act, but something to do with the data economy projects that we are now looking forward with Citra. And this coordination group of ours are looking for different kind of new solutions. For example, geopolymers are used a lot now in mining areas and other areas sorry, to create new kind of covering materials or floor materials, but then also 3D printing for shelters or fences or something like that. This comes to this geopolitical situation that could be used in a handy. But there's a lot of going on, a lot of research work going on, and now we are looking forward how to bring all these into the scaling up. That's what we are doing at the moment.
Thank you. David, Emmanuel mentioned e-waste. Now, and I know we've had the WE directive for almost 20 years. So why aren't we further along? What are the barriers? What are the challenges? There's been a big push to deliver the Green Deal, but you know, we still seem to be talking about things that we were talking about 2 decades ago.
No, exactly. In many respects, what's happening on a continent-wide basis through this work that the EU is leading is very similar to the corporate work that Toyota did on its supply chain after the earthquake shook its own supply chain more than a decade ago. So I draw parallels between the two. And when Toyota did that work, they did it in the expectation that at some point in the future, there would be another problem. Excuse me. That problem turned into COVID. And so when COVID came along, Toyota had itself a very significant competitive advantage because it had so understood its supply chain down to very fine detail that it knew exactly what it needed to do as the COVID supply chain disruption unfolded. And I think just as George said earlier, this is going to be taking 10 to 15 years to do the same in-depth work across the continent of Europe so that we understand the risks that we're taking and where they actually are, rather than perhaps at the moment, we don't have enough data, we're not sure. And let me give you an example of what that is. Jennifer, you've mentioned waste specifically, and the EU has led on product areas. Emmanuel's mentioned passenger vehicles, for example. So we have an end-of-life vehicle directive, had from 2009, just about to be currently under revision. But we still lose 30% of end-of-life vehicles. They disappear during their 10 to 15 year life cycle. We don't know what happens to them, they just fall out of the system. That's true for a lot of products. And the interesting thing about remanufacturing businesses is they have a great deal of knowledge which does not get fed back into the design process or to policymakers about what they discover about the life cycle of products. So many members are currently remanufacturing products that have got flat panel displays. Flat panel displays take up 56% of indium. How much knowledge spreads up? We've had research projects done which show that that's technically possible. Economically, it's not possible to pull back the indium from those flat panel displays. Extending their life, however, is also problematic because of the design of that product. Capacitors are passing through our remanufacturing members. 36% of tantalum is used in capacitors. 60% of gallium goes through the optoelectronics area, integrated circuits area, some of which will pass through remanufacturers. And typically what they report is it's almost impossible for many of the large categories of product to be able to extend their life because of design issues. So there are horizontal design improvements that could be made, and the effort is we now see the EU is trying to do that through a separate activity. As George said, it's not just about the CRM Act, but the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation currently passing through the Parliament aims to deal with at least some of the products that are non-WEEE products, a rather odd list of 12 products at the moment, but also the intermediate products like steel and aluminium. So it should make us optimistic that policymakers are trying to bring light to these really very dark and difficult areas. But as I say, the 15% target that's been set is really very ambitious. I suspect, we don't know incidentally, but I suspect the current recycling rate, the material recycling rate alone is probably less than 1% critical raw materials across the EU at the moment. So it's a really poor place to be starting from. But if we don't do it, and this is where I disagree entirely with Wolfgang's approach, if we don't do this, if we don't recognize that this is an emergency, we have to get ourselves organized in the way that the board of Toyota did after the earthquake. Unless we do this, we will have a serious problem again in the next 10 years, and we cannot afford to do that. So we have to take action, uncomfortable as it might be. We have to take action now and not leave it for any longer.
Well, Wolfgang, I'll bring you back in there to respond to that. David is mentioning a sort of raft of different policies that we're seeing coming from the EU with a great deal of urgency. I mean, even I'm thinking things like the right to repair directive, which isn't really off the ground yet, but would extend the life of products. I mean, how much of the difficulties are we facing are due to things like planned obsolescence? I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, I think you best pose the questions to that question to the entrepreneur, and that is the voice I wanted to introduce into this webinar. And as our organization, as I already said, is composed of mainly SMEs that suffer much more from any legislation and regulations. It is their voice that needs to be echoed and gives you the response of the questions posed. So just look at two things that have been developing over the past 3 months. When you notice a corporate sustainability reporting directive, which is now to be planned to even extend towards how corporations meet staff work-life balance, which is the latest approach by the Commission. And of course, that is not something written on the paper, it affects immediately also the business. And to give you an example, we have a local smelter close to our head office. It's 1 out of 14 smelters in Europe. It's an SME type family driving company. And when they started their business right after unification, and that was really tough times in the early days of unified Germany in the East, they had only one person that was responsible for the EU bureaucracy. They have actually a number of 100 people employed. 5 out of these 100 people have only things to do that matters EU regulation and to meet the legislation. So we have 5 more people employed that do only care about the paperwork. And in the end, and that is also an easy answer to the topics discussed here, in the end, we do always have to consider that mining, that processing, that recycling is a business to generate money, to generate an income. So we have to be aware that an entrepreneur wishes to achieve, to gain a revenue. Otherwise, he moves to another business. I think this simple equation is not yet aware in the brains of many decision makers. And that's all I can say on the moment. And if you look at other regulations and directives, look at the REACH and ECA directives, assigning, for instance, battery lithium salts at high-risk chemicals, which in turn will then automatically raise regulations on battery makers. And if you remember that they are key for implementing the energy transition, then that is giving proof how coordinated the European Commission follows supply security. Another example could be the Supply Chain Act. So we need a response how to really boost the e-industrialization. We are more than happy that the Commission introduced the wording reindustrialization of Europe, but of course then we have to exercise the regulations the way that it is feasible. At present, it's not only our internal situation here in Europe that faces problems to that reindustrialization. We are now also exposed to a heavy global challenge. Look at the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. Look to those places that offer far cheaper green energy, such as potentially also European countries, which is good. But of course, we will face a strong movement also of industry to places where energy is cheaper, where regulation is lower, and where they are more welcomed. And these are the topics that need to be considered. And I think then it's really time to hurry. We know about the problems for more than 20 years. So the Raw Materials Directive was established in 2008. We had the first supply chain disruptions in 2010. We had Fukushima. You can even go back to the past, to 1973, where we had an oil embargo by the OPEC. So we know about this. In 2006, a German magazine published a paper, a cover story about the new Cold War, about the raw materials. So we know about that situation, but I have not seen really the progress here to establish new mining and to maintain expertise in those fields we do heavily need also in order to meet the Green Deal.
Let me ask you fundamentally, Wolfgang. I mean, the Commission isn't coming up with regulations simply for the joy of creating more bureaucracy. I mean, do you agree with the principles or the aims behind the sorts of regulations that we're seeing? I mean, we are talking about a climate crisis here. It's not simply for the sake of giving SMEs more paperwork.
Yeah, also other countries look to face the climate crisis, but they do it more effectively. So look at the US, and why are so many companies tend to go to the US? So that is just the answer on what is needed here in Europe. Of course, I can assume that the idea behind the paperwork is not to block business, but in fact it affects business. And again, mining, processing, recycling is made to earn money from, and a free capital flow at global level, money moves a different direction. And so that is my concern. And we've seen how many compartments of the mining value chain got bankrupt over the past 2-3 years. Past year, we had an 80% more bankruptcies in Germany in the raw material sector. And that is a dramatic development. And there are alternatives. At present, we are more in a global competition, and there are many more countries offering better conditions in permitting, in legislation, in energy supply, and also political security, but also to provide skilled labor staff and so on.
Well, I'm not sure that everyone would agree with you that the US is a fine example of climate probity, but David, you wanted to add something.
I fear that our discussion about the Critical Raw Materials Act is being hijacked to have a discussion about the difference between the US approach, putting $300 billion of subsidy on the table for green activities versus the evidence base that Europe's been accumulating for years and trying to do things rather more carefully. So it's a philosophical discussion about an approach to how you deal with this emergency. I don't think we're going to solve that this morning, at least I doubt it, but I don't think Europe is ever going to be able to compete with the US in putting up a huge fund of subsidy to attract investment to the US. And I personally don't feel like I'm on the panel to discuss that issue, but I do want to talk about the CRM Act and what Europe can do about the risks that we've identified through the CRM Act.
Emmanuel, I think you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, I think indeed we are having two, not separate, but two discussions that are. But I think what Wolfgang is saying as well is very relevant. So I'm not going here but I don't want to beat on that at this point in time. One thing that will be important if we want to succeed from a European perspective would be indeed to make sure that there is more consistency between the objective of the legislation and the legislation themselves. Because the CRM Act is in itself a block, but when it comes to recycling, there are many other building blocks, that are going to be revised, and in which there would be opportunities to basically recover more materials and potentially also recover more CRMs, whether we speak about e-waste, ELVs, and this is where I think we need to make sure that the different legislation speaks with each other and they are not contradicting each other. And here we also have a number of issues to be addressed when it comes to the consistency between, on one hand, waste legislation for recovery purposes, chemical legislation to address risks from the use of certain substances back into products, eco-design, and here I really would like to echo waste shipment as well, because a few things that have been said about making sure that we are really shooting in the right direction, and that from a regulatory burden perspective, we are having the right calibration between, on one hand, the level of requirements we are imposing, and on the other hand, the targets that we want to achieve. I'm not going to build more because obviously I know time is flying.
Thank you. And Sari, I wanted to bring you in again as well. I noticed you nodding along to various comments being made.
Very good discussion from all the point of view, and to the list of this comprehensive regulation issue is also competition regulation. So that is one of the circular economy big problems, that if you make these ecosystems or these clusters, where are the limits that where we come to the cartels and stuff like that? it seems to be one of the key issues in circular economy clusters or ecosystems to move forward, so that we also take into look that what we can do there. But the Raw Material Act as such, and these two discussions, it is very welcome, but we need to remember that we are in the global market, as mentioned, and we need to take these actions so that we realize also that the time span, for example, there is something that is quite exciting from this kind of heavy industry point of view. You don't do too much in 12 months or 24 months. They are very long processes, and this permission process in Finland, I think we are there very not the worst in the world, but we are looking forward. We are willing to take care of our environment very seriously. So we are ready to make some kind of trials, but to make sure that environment is taken care. And I think one of the issues here in Finland is also the location, and that sense cost, because the mines are up north and the people are here south, and the buildings that could be recycled are here south. So the tailings or the waste of the mines are not easily used in construction in local. So we need something that adds the value of the material that comes from the waste streams, and that's where it is important to know what's in there and look at these critical materials very carefully and analyze that. And I think this analyze system is something that we should look in the European level, what we could do there together, what kind of funding, for example, we could provide to mines and the landowners to see what they have, for example, in closed mines, how to utilize those wastes in those areas. But very much looking forward how we can make these strategic programs and projects ongoing here, because they are generating a lot of competitive advantage to Europe, because what we have been testing here could be used in many other countries after that.
David, briefly, because time is running out.
We're running out of time, but I think a couple of points I want to make. Let's welcome the suggestions on increasing the recycling rate for magnets specifically. The market is not going to deliver in the US or anywhere else a capture of magnets. 30% of rare earths go into magnets, permanent magnets, unless we specifically go after getting those magnets back through regulation. They aren't going to come back. We're going to lose the rare earths into the ferrous, non-ferrous mix. So that's really positive. The second thing is, I would just say to Wolfgang, to compromise with you, Mountain Pass Mine in the United States, source of rare earths, closed in 2002 because the price was forced down by Chinese competitors. It was the US government that intervened to make sure that mine reopened, principally for defense purposes, in 2012. And I think that intervention from the US government was very wise, and it would not have happened had not the US government recognized the risk of Chinese domination of the rare earths market. So perhaps that's a compromise for us, that government does need to intervene. And I'm suggesting that one of the ways that we should applaud through the CRM Act is the intervention in relation to permanent magnets and the rare earths that get dissipated through that path. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, David. I see there's a couple of questions from Stina Jonsson. One in reaction to Wolfgang saying, don't entrepreneurs feel that the climate crisis can only be addressed by new ways of working? And she's suggesting that the ones who are quick to change will be the ones who actually gain the most. And another question, George, I think it's for you, and if you can answer very briefly, will there be policy work to make it much more expensive for material users to use newly mined materials rather than recycled materials?
So if I can react quickly, so there's no policy to make raw materials more expensive. There are measures to like on environmental footprint, which could direct yeah, it could counterbalance the price aspect and put a higher weight on environmental aspects. So that could lead to a certain recalibration that the price is only one component. And if you take into account environmental footprint, then of course, in comparison, the recycled raw materials will be more attractive for buyers. So that's the idea, to leave it rather to consumer choice there, but no policy to increase raw materials prices, certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. And I noticed there we've got links there in the chat, so you can find out further information by clicking and following some of those. It's at that point we're wrapping up the panel. From our attendees listening, have anyone got any thoughts they'd like to share? Last chance if you want to raise your hand to get involved in the discussion. I think not. I think it's too early in the morning for too many people to want to switch on their cameras. I sympathize with that. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for your input and your thoughts. It's been a vibrant discussion. So thank you very much. I'm sure it will continue very many further discussions. I mean, we have a link there in the chat to the future conferences. There's an international conference on EU raw materials supply that is happening later on this month. I can tell you I'm hosting an EIT Raw Materials Summit next month. So there's a lot more opportunities to continue this discussion. I'm sure we will not be at the end of the discussion on the Green Deal and indeed critical raw materials. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now, as always, to Nina Hopman, who is from the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, who will tell us about the platform funding opportunities.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you to all the panelists. I was listening carefully to what you've been saying. We wanted to share some funding opportunities related to our topic today, and also with what is happening with Euroclusters in Ukraine. So first of all, there's a call opening for recycling technologies for critical raw materials from end-of-life products. Projects are expected to develop raw materials recycling and reuse of components and or products from end-of-life products technologies and urban mines, and improve the responsible supply of raw materials to Europe in line with the EU principles for sustainable raw materials, and of course contribute to the EU climate neutrality objectives. Deadline for this call is the 20th of April, so not too far. Not much time, but if you're interested, look at this call. It's in Horizon Innovation Action, the topic ID you see on the screen and the link in the chat. So have a look at this call. There's a call opening also for technologies for processing and refining of critical raw materials to increase the recovery rates of valuable raw materials, to improve significantly the economic performance in terms of high material, water, energy, and cost efficiency, improve the health, safety, and environmental performance of the operations. With the same deadline, 20th of April, and Horizon Innovation Action. Click in the link in the chat to have a look at this call. Another opportunity is innovative technologies for sustainable and decarbonized extraction. Here, projects are expected to develop innovative technologies for extraction of raw materials in the European Union, to increase the domestic EU sourcing of raw materials and to improve the sustainable supply of raw materials to Europe, with this objective of also reducing sustainably the greenhouse gas emissions and to accelerate the development of EU domestic raw materials exploration projects. Same deadline, also in Horizon Innovation Action, with the topic ID in the screen and the link in the chat. And last but not least, there's the opportunity for new processes for upcoming recycling feeds, and that for EU partnership. Projects are expected to reduce strategic dependencies for critical materials by promoting a circular economy and develop recycling technologies targeting upcoming recycling feeds. They should also achieve recycling efficiency and material recovery targets as described in the batteries regulation by industries, and help with recycling chains to be cost effective. Deadline for this is the 18th of April, also a Horizon Innovation Action, topic ID in the screen and in the chat. We also want to raise your attention to what are ongoing opportunities for SMEs, especially from the Euroclusters, one of the flagship initiatives of cluster networks and projects that are currently publishing and have published calls for SMEs. They cover different sectors, different ecosystems. You can see all the open calls for SMEs published on clustercollaboration.eu/open calls. And we will publish this presentation afterwards in the ECCP, so have a look at it. It is for agri-food SMEs, SMEs working on water challenges, creative and cultural industries, digital technologies, and manufacturing, covering calls for ICT, fintech, health, but also for textiles, for tourism. We have a call for innovation products in aerospace and defense. And there are also opportunities in photonics, in furniture and living sector, microelectronics, social economy, and urban agriculture. So a lot to discover and many opportunities for SMEs. And to close the circle with what Marek presented at the beginning, with the clusters, mid regions, and Kosovo, there are also many different opportunities to get funding for EU-Ukrainian cooperation. We will, as said, we will publish this PDF so that this presentation, so you will have all the links to look into this. For example, opportunities offered by DG Regio is Interreg. We have 2 open calls from the Single Market Program to facilitate the access of Ukrainian SMEs to the single market. There are opportunities for research institutions for higher education, as well as funding to make SMEs more competitive and funding for interregional collaboration. So please have a look at these if you're interested in establishing collaboration with Ukrainian entities. This the final words from me, and back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, as always, Nina, and continue the dialogue, everyone. As I said, we weren't going to cover or solve all the discussions in our short time this morning, but you can see there the link to continue the discussion on LinkedIn. I think we jumped rather quickly to a different screen. I was going to tell you to register for the next talks. The next one is on the 19th of April, and that's on private financing. 3rd of May is the transition pathway on construction. I'm sure many of you will be also interested in that if you were interested this morning. And on the 17th of May, it's the transition pathway on textiles. So don't miss any of those. I'm sure we will have more great discussions. I think now Marek wanted to have another last word to advise people on another upcoming event. Marek, did you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you very shortly. On behalf of the European Commission, I would like to invite you to this European Commission stand at Hanover Messe. You know, Hanover Messe is a big industry gathering in Europe, and we will have 5 days. First one on the 17th on energy, second on raw materials, the third on access to finance. The fourth, the most important, is about alliances, networks, and clusters are there. We will have the session on clusters. We will have pitching of clusters. Still, if you are there in Hanover, you can contact me and contact a cluster collaboration platform if you want to pitch, to collaborate with. Sometimes we have still some space, and then this all in the framework of the 30 years of the single market. You can have tickets of the Commission for this event. I put it in the link, so you are all welcome, but you must come to our stand. Thank you.
Okay, everyone must go to the stand, all form an orderly queue at once. Thank you all very much for your attention this morning, as always, and you can register on the European Cluster Collaboration platform. You can use that QR code that you see on the screen, and you'll also be able to find recordings of today's event, so you can go back and also have a look at some of those links again in case you didn't get a chance to click on them today. That's it from me for this morning. I wish you all a very good day wherever you are in Europe. Have a good one.